I'm gonna try to skip over things that have already been stated in the interest of brevity and potential avoidance of your boredom. So, this has to go into the full, can you put this into presentation mode? Right now it's in slide mode. I'll do it. You need to hit that. I got it, okay. Okay, so what I've done here in this slide is to try to give you a sense of what the entire Belt Road Initiative looks like. And this here is the portion that comprises CPAC. And the important thing for you to take away is that in terms of the cost of transporting fuel through this transportation route is actually 6 times more expensive than using one of the alternative routes that goes through China, right? So I want you to let that sink in. Moving a barrel of crude from Gwadar up through Pakistan and into Xinjiang is 6 times more expensive than using one of these other routes through China. So in some sense, I'm giving away the story. This is not an economic corridor. And so I frequently joke that CPEC does not stand for the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. It actually stands for colonizing Pakistan to enrich China corridor. If we could go to the next slide. All right, so this is a closer in view of the different corridors that are a part of the Belt Road Initiative. One of the things that I want to draw your attention to, this is called Khomeini Port, but that's not the name that's typically used. Gwadar Port, which is on the Makran coast in Pakistan, is also viewed as a very close competitor to a port which is actually just a couple hundred miles to the east in Iran, and that's called Chabahar Port, which is built by India. So what's actually happening here, and which this map shows to some extent, is that there's a strategic competition that's going on, and some of you have noted that the Saudis have come on board CPAC. So what we have on one side are the Saudis, the Chinese, and the Pakistanis, which are vested in CPAC. And on the other side, we have the Iranians and the Indians that are vested in this alternative GLOC, or ground lines of communication, that starts at Chabahar. For the Indians, this alternative route is very important since it does not have access to Central Asia through Pakistan. It has to rely on transit through Iran to get access to Central Asia, and most importantly, to Afghanistan. And so one of the things that the Indians have done to expand connectivity between Iran's port in Chabahar and Afghanistan is it's invested in road and rail links that vehicles can move materials into Zaranj, and then from Zaranj in Afghanistan, it connects to the ring road. So in other words, this is an alternative route that India can use to transit goods into Afghanistan as an alternate route to Afghanistan. Why is this so important to the CPEC story? Well, as you know, I hope most of you know, the Pakistanis have relied upon their proxies, the Taliban, to basically subdue Afghanistan and to make Afghanistan a proxy of the Pakistani state. And Afghanistan, until the emergence of these transit corridors linking Afghanistan to these ports in Iran, was exclusively dependent upon Pakistan's access to warm waters. And Pakistan would use access to these ports as a way to politically punish Afghanistan. So not only are these ports in Iran important for India's interest in projecting them into Iran and beyond, it's also important for Afghanistan's political independence that it have access to a port apart from Pakistan. And not surprisingly, Pakistan is very fearful of this situation. But from the point of view of money, the route through Iran is a safer route than the route through Pakistan, which is the second bullet point to my argument that CPEC is not an economic corridor at all. Please, next slide, please. All this has already been covered. But what I want to draw your attention to is perhaps the most pernicious aspect of CPEC, which has not been covered by the previous speakers. Most people think of CPEC as transit corridors, as well as energy projects, as well as economic zones. But in fact, one of the most important aspects of CPEC is that China is gaining access to agricultural lands in Pakistan, which it is using to grow food for China. Why is this so problematic? Well, South Asia is under a lot of water pressure. So it is at the height of immorality that China is taking or making access of Pakistani lands and water to feed its own people, given the gravity of the water crisis in South Asia. And unfortunately, most Pakistanis are completely unaware of this dimension of CPEC, even though this plan has been leaked to the Pakistani press. One of the reasons is that the press that's published it has been the English press. To my knowledge, there's been no corresponding coverage of the agricultural dimension in the Urdu press. And the Urdu press is most sensitive to the Pakistani deep state because very few people, relatively speaking, in Pakistan can read English. Next, please. So as already been said, there's really two choke points to CPEC. And I'm going to focus first on the northern choke point, which is where CPEC connects the northern part of Pakistan to Xinjiang in China. Next, please. So as someone who has, I'm just going to cut this question off. I have traveled virtually all across the CPEC route. So you don't need to ask me that in the Q&A. Yes, I've been there, despite the fact that I'm a girl. Okay, so here's the other thing about CPEC, which again makes it not economic. If anyone has traveled the KKH, you will know that this is not a road that is meant for heavy transportation. And in fact, it's probably one of the most perilous roads I've ever been on. Two trucks can't go at the same time, and any of you that have traveled on these roads in South Asia, this is nothing new. You look down the ravine and you see the corpses of trucks and buses that wasn't so lucky before you passed, and you're just hoping that you don't end in that ravine. One of the issues that happens repeatedly is that there are landslides throughout. Now the Pakistanis, in comparison to some of the other places where I've been in South Asia, like Nepal and India, are comparatively faster in getting those landslides cleared. At any given time, there's likely to be a landslide. And in fact, I believe it was in 2010, one of the landslides was so severe that it actually turned a large swath of this highway into a lake. And God bless the Pakistani ingenuity. They just gave it a name, Atabad Lake, and they made it a vacation point. But what I want to draw your attention to, what was happening, this is most certainly a fudged photo. Because if any of you have seen these jingle trucks in Pakistan, they are never empty. In fact, they're usually so full that you worry about them capsizing and flipping over, and we've all seen that on the side of the roads. These trucks are actually empty. So if this was actually a truck that was fully loaded, I doubt you could have 4 of them. So these were barges that would get off of the KKH, enter onto this jalopy, cross the so-called lake, and get back on the road again. So for many years, this was a hindrance. Next, please. So what the Chinese did, they actually built this very nice bridge. And if you are the IAF, the Indian Air Force, this is called a target, right? This is easily bombable. In fact, the Indians have made that observation to me. So this is very nice. It gets over the problem of Lake Atabad, but it doesn't get over the more quotidian problem that at any given point along the KKH, you will have these landslides. Next, please. And so here's just more pictures of the landslides and the equipment that are used to loot. And by the way, this is up here in the upper left, you see this traffic. This is what that road mostly looks like. Does this look like an economic corridor to you? Doesn't look like one to me, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, next please. So in addition, there are enormous human security challenges. And it's to the credit of the international media, they at least know where Balochistan is. If you mention Gilgit-Baltistan to the New York Times, they'll look at you and ask if it's a candy bar. They have no clue about Gilgit-Baltistan. I would say it's actually easier to get information Pakistan than it is Gilgit-Baltistan. We know that there have been protests about the various CPEC-related activities, but hearing about these protests, you only hear about it through social media. I know of exactly one newspaper article that came out in August 2016 that talked about not only the protests, but also the heavy-handed use of the state. Notably, the current army chief of Pakistan, I think one of the reasons why he was selected was that he has spent time in the FCNA, which is one of the northern locations of the Pakistan Army, as well as in Balochistan. So you think it's a coincidence the current army chief has cut his teeth in both ends of CPEC? I don't think that's a coincidence at all. Another thing that's happening in Gilgit-Baltistan is this is part of the disputed area of Jammu and Kashmir. Actually, Pakistan gave away a large portion of Jammu and Kashmir to the Chinese as a part of formalizing their relationship. Obviously, they weren't entitled to do that because that territory technically belongs to India. But the Chinese are now encouraging the Pakistanis to formalize Gilgit-Baltistan as a province. Now, in my view, because I'm a realist, I don't believe there's going to be map changing in South Asia in my lifetime or the lifetime of any of my nieces or nephews. In my view, given the Taliban situation, that's probably not a bad thing for people in Gilgit-Baltistan, but it does materially change in many ways the status of the area. So the bottom line is, for this thing to ever become a transit corridor, a proper transit corridor, you are going to have to do massive mountain excavation. And if you're familiar with the history of building the KKH, this is an enormous undertaking. And if you know about the Chinese economic model, they don't hire locals. They bring in Chinese to do this. This is going to generate 0 jobs for locals. All of the economic activity will benefit China. Right? And by the way, the Chinese even bring their own food into Pakistan. They even bring their own potatoes into Pakistan. The amount of value added left in Pakistan is minimal. Let's very quickly go to the southern, the next slide. And what? I'll finish sooner. So because I suspect we've already discussed Gwadar quite a bit, I want to focus on a few aspects which have not been dilated upon thus far. This is Gwadar. It's supposed to be a port. Anyone see the problem with this picture? What do you not see at this port? Traffic. You don't see a damn boat. You don't even see a canoe. Now, why do you think there's no traffic? Because it's not an economic corridor, right? Now, here's the other thing about CPEC that hasn't been mentioned. Why do we need CPEC? Why do we need this port at Gwadar at all? Karachi is at under capacity. In other words, there is still capacity at Karachi. Normally, we would think about putting in a port when another port is at capacity. Well, that's not the case. And in fact, going back to the first map of the overall CPEC project, the only way Gwadar is more cost effective than the Karachi port is if we have a road that connects Gwadar to the ring road in Afghanistan, or if we have a shorter route that connects Gwadar, it probably wouldn't go through the federally administered tribal areas for reasons that are somewhat obvious if you know that area, but it would probably run adjacent to the east of Fatah and connect to the north at Torkham. And that would cut out some significant delays. But what happens now, when the boats do show up every once in a while, they are offloaded at Gwadar, they are moved to Karachi and then through the north. So this is in fact the most asinine way to move things. Why would you not prefer to take things to Karachi as opposed to going to Gwadar, then going to Karachi, and then going north? Again, this is not an economic corridor. The other problem with Gwadar, and I don't think it's been mentioned yet, that the plan to make this a 1 million+ person city is obviated by the fact that there is no water in Gwadar. Right now, there is a water shortage. It cannot sustain the growth that's already been seen. People are literally moving water on the backs of donkeys. And that's no offense to donkeys, right? Now, there are desalination plants at Gwadar, but none of them as of yet are running. Now, what is up and running? Now, I can't go to Gwadar. I can't go back to Pakistan. I'm very much PNG, and if I weren't, they wouldn't let me see this. But what I hear and read from Pakistani media reports, that there are Chinese military all over Gwadar, and that there are large areas of Gwadar where the signs are in Chinese, and every once in a while we see the videos of the Chinese having confrontations with Pakistani police because they want to go out and see their prostitutes, and the Pakistani police don't think that's wise. And I'm not even joking, that's a real thing. You can see these videos. And by the way, in what other country would the Chinese hop up and down on the truck of a police car because they're angry that they can't go see their prostitutes? Right? I mean, literally, CPEC is China colonizing Pakistan for its own economic enrichment. Next, please. So we already talked about the human security challenges. Just as is the case with Gilgit-Baltistan, the labor is being done by Chinese, and if the Chinese are employing others, they are employing largely Punjabis. Now, Baloch will see this conspiratorially as a part of a deliberate effort to colonize Balochistan by the Punjabis. I tend to see it from the point of view of labor markets. Because the Pakistani state has so privileged the Punjab, over the long durée of the state's existence, most of the human capital resides in the Punjab as well as Karachi. And as has already been noted, Balochistan has been the most neglected province. It is the least skilled province. So Baloch would be the least likely people that the Chinese would actually hire. To put down the insurgency in Balochistan, the state has used two tools, and I'm not going to elaborate them because I've elaborated them elsewhere on other occasions, but their tools are basically twofold. One is political Islam, right? If you look at maps of madrasa utilization in Balochistan, the state has heavily invested in these Deobandi madrasas. In fact, you find districts in Balochistan that have the highest utilization of madrasas over the entire country. And most of the growth is happening in these Deobandi madrasas. Why am I focusing Deobandi? Deobandi is the Islamic interpretive school in Pakistan, which is responsible for most of the murders, whether we're looking at the killing of Shia, Ahmadis, Barelvis, and of course non-Muslims, right? So when I say Deobandi, I'm using this deliberately. There are other organizations like the Lashkar-e-Taiba who are also involved in Balochistan, but they are not involved in killing people. Their principal role is what they call basically social service and proselytization. And so it's not a coincidence when there have been natural disasters in Balochistan, the Pakistani state has not let in other national or international aid organizations, and instead have only let LET's philanthropic arm, as they call it, into the province. And the other tool, last sentence actually, and the last tool that it's used has been abject use of force, right? And I'm going to finish on this sentence. The Pakistani state will kill every Baloch to make this province and its resources safe for Chinese exploitation, unless we do something about it. Thank you.